The Polish-Russian War of 1792 was fought between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth on one side, and the Targowica Confederation and the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great on the other. The war took place in two theaters, northern in Lithuania and southern in Ukraine. In both, the Polish forces retreated before the numerically superior Russian forces, though they offered significantly more resistance in the south, thanks to the effective leadership of Polish commanders Prince Józef Poniatowski and Tadeusz Kosciuszko. During the three-month-long struggle, several battles were fought, but no side scored a decisive victory. The largest success of the Polish forces was the defeat of one of the Russian formations at the Battle of Zeeland on 18 June. In the aftermath of the battle, the Polish highest military award, Virtuti Militari, was established. The war ended when the Polish king Stanislaw August Poniatowski decided to seek a diplomatic solution, asked for a ceasefire with the Russians and joined the Targowica Confederation, as demanded by the Russian Empire. Background: decline of the Commonwealth. By the early 18th century, the magnates of Poland and Lithuania controlled the state, or rather, they managed to ensure that no reforms would be carried out that might weaken the privileged status, through the abuse of the liberum veto rule, which enabled any deputy to paralyze the same proceedings. Deputies bribed by magnates or foreign powers, or those simply content to believe they were living in an unprecedented golden age, paralyzed the Commonwealth's government for over a century. The idea of reforming the Commonwealth gained traction since the mid-17th century. It was, however, viewed with suspicion not only by its magnates but also by neighboring countries, which had been content with the deterioration of the Commonwealth and abhorred the thought of a resurgent and democratic power on their borders. With the Commonwealth army reduced to around 16,000, it was easy for its neighbors to intervene directly. Attempts at reform. A major opportunity for reform presented itself during the Great Sejm of 1788–92. Poland's neighbors were preoccupied with wars and unable to intervene forcibly in Polish affairs. Russian Empire and Archduchy of Austria were engaged in hostilities with the Ottoman Empire. The Russians also found themselves simultaneously fighting in the Russo-Swedish War, 1788–1790, a new alliance between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Prussia seeming to provide security against Russian intervention. And on 3 May 1791, the new constitution was read and adopted to overwhelming popular support. With the wars between Turkey and Sweden and Russia having ended, Tsarina Catherine was furious over the adoption of the document, which she believed threatened Russian influence in Poland. Russia had viewed Poland as a de facto protectorate. The worst possible news have arrived from Warsaw. The Polish king has become almost sovereign, was the reaction of one of Russia's chief foreign policy authors, Alexander Bezbaranko, when he learned of the new constitution. The Kingdom of Prussia was also strongly opposed to the new Polish constitution, and Polish diplomats received a note that the new constitution changed the Polish state so much that Prussia did not consider its obligations binding. Just like Russia, Prussia was concerned that the newly strengthened Polish state could become a threat, and the Prussian foreign minister, Friedrich Wilhelm von Schulenburg-Kennet, clearly and with rare candor told Poles that Prussia did not support the constitution and refused to help the Commonwealth in any form, even as a mediator, as it was not in Prussia's interest to see the Commonwealth strengthened so that it could threaten Prussia in some future. The Prussian statesman Ewald von Herzberg expressed the fears of European conservatives. The Poles have given the coup de grace to the Prussian monarchy by voting a constitution, elaborating that a strong Commonwealth would likely demand the return of the lands Prussia acquired in the First Partition. The constitution was not adopted without dissent in the Commonwealth itself, either. Magnates who had opposed the constitution draft from the start, namely Franciszek Kowary-Branicki, Stanislaw Szczytny Potocki, Surin Ruski, and Simon and Joseph Kosakovsky, asked Tsarina Catherine to intervene and restore their privileges, such as the Russian guaranteed cardinal laws abolished under the new statute. To that end, these magnates formed the Targowica Confederation. The Confederation's proclamation, prepared in St. Petersburg in January 1792, criticized the Constitution for contributing to, in their own words, contagion of democratic ideas. Following the fatal examples set in Paris, it asserted that the Parliament has broken all fundamental laws, swept away all liberties of the gentry, and on the 3rd of May 1791 turned into a revolution and a conspiracy. The Confederates declared an intention to overcome this revolution. We can do nothing but turn trustingly to Tsarina Catherine, a distinguished and fair empress, our neighboring friend and ally, who respects the nation's need for well-being and always offers it a helping hand, they wrote. The Confederates aligned with Tsarina Catherine and asked her for military intervention. On 18 May 1792, Russian ambassador to Poland, Yakov Bulgakov, delivered a declaration of war to the Polish foreign minister Joachim Kreptowicz. Russian armies entered Poland and Lithuania on the same day, starting the war. Opposing forces. The Russian army numbered nearly 98,000. It was commanded by generals Mikhail Krechetnikov and Mikhail Kakovsky. The Russians also had an advantage in combat experience. The Russian plan called for Kakovsky to advance through Ukraine, taking Kamieniec Podolski, Chelm and Lublin, and approach Polish capital of Warsaw from the south. Krechetnikov was to advance through Minsk, Wilno, Brzesk-Litewski and Białystok, and approach Warsaw from the north, where he was to link with Kakovsky. Whereas the Russians had good intelligence network in Poland, and were mostly aware of Polish army distribution and strength, the Poles had much less intelligence, receiving contradictory and often erroneous reports, and unsure whether the war would even start up to the point the Russian troops crossed the border. Stanislaw August Poniatowski, king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was the commander-in-chief of the Polish forces, but in practice he delegated this position to his nephew, Prince Joseph Poniatowski. Poniatowski had in theory at his disposal a 48,000-strong Crown army and the Lithuanian army more than half that size to confront him. In practice, Polish forces, still forming following the reforms of the Constitution of 3 May, numbered only 37,000. The army was in the midst of reorganizing, with key documents on unit numbers and composition passed as recently as in April. It was also short on equipment and experienced personnel. In the southeast corner of the country, the Ukrainian lands, the Polish forces were initially concentrated separately in 3 regions of the expected front, under Tadeusz Kosciuszko, Michał Wielhorski and Prince Poniatowski himself. The Polish Crown Army in Ukraine, led by Prince Poniatowski, and supported by Kosciuszko, was about 17,000, 21,000 or 24,000 strong. They were faced on this southeastern war theatre with a nearly 4 times larger enemy army under General Mikhail Kakovsky, who had about 64,000 men under his command. Kakovsky's forces were divided into 4 corps. First, 17,000 strong, under the command of General Mikhail Golenishtchev-Kutuzov. Second, under General Ivan Dunin. Third, under General Otto Wilhelm Derfelden, and fourth, under General Andrei Levanidov. The Targowica Confederates did not represent any real strength, and their attempts to gather popular support in Poland upon crossing borders failed miserably, with only few dozens joining at first. Later the number would grow, but not significantly, and even the Russians saw them as not having any military value, keeping them from front lines. In Lithuania, Commonwealth Lithuanian army numbered about 15,000, with an additional Crown detachment of about 3,000. They were commanded by Duke Louis of Württemberg. Württemberg made no plans for the war, and the troops were not readied for action by the time the war started. The The Russian army in that theater under General Mikhail Krechetnikov was 33,700 strong or 38,000 strong. The Russian army was also divided into 4 corps. First, under one of Targowica Confederate leaders, Simon Kosakovsky, 7,300 strong. Second, under General Boris Malin, 7,000 strong. Third, under General Yuri Dolgorukov, 15,400 strong, and fourth, under General Ivan Ferzan, 8,300 strong. Additional Polish forces, about 8,000 strong, were to concentrate in Warsaw under command of King Poniatowski as reserve. Tadeusz Kosciuszko proposed a plan where the entire Polish army would be concentrated and would engage one of the Russian armies, in order to assure numerical parity and to boost the morale of mostly inexperienced Polish forces with a quick victory. This plan was, however, rejected by Prince Poniatowski. Poniatowski also planned to avoid serious engagements in the first phase of the war, hoping to receive the expected Prussian reinforcements of 30,000, which would bring parity to the two sides. War. Southern Theater. First Russian forces crossed the border in Ukraine on the night of 19 May 1792. The Russians in that theater would encounter significantly more resistance than they expected, as Commonwealth's top commanders, Prince Poniatowski and Kosciuszko, were stationed there. Kosciuszko joined Prince Poniatowski near Janov on 29 May. The Crown Army was judged too weak to oppose the 4 columns of enemy armies advancing into West Ukraine and began a fighting withdrawal to the western side of the southern Bug River, towards Lubar and Polon, with Kosciuszko commanding the rear guard. Poniatowski, in face of a significant numerical inferiority of his forces, and promised reinforcements by King Poniatowski, decided to abandon Ukraine and move to Volhynia, where Polon was to be fortified as a major defensive point, and where Lubomirski was tasked with gathering supplies. On 14 June Wielhorsky's unit was defeated at the Battle of Berezko. On 17 June Poniatowski finally received awaited reinforcements, about 2,000 troops led by Michał Lubomirski. Next day the Poles, led by Prince Poniatowski, defeated one of the Russian formations of General Irakli Morkov at the Battle of Zeelance on 18 June. The victory was celebrated by King Poniatowski, who sent the new Virtuti Militari medals for the campaign leaders and soldiers, as the first since John III Sobieski. The Russian forces, however, kept advancing. The Polish army, under the command of Joseph Poniatowski, was still retreating in order, yielding to the more powerful enemy as necessary to avoid annihilation, according to the prince's judgment. In early July, near Dubno, Prince Poniatowski and Kosciuszko were betrayed by Michał Lubomirski, who was tasked with King Poniatowski with resupplying the troops. Instead, Lubomirski joined the Russian side, and either hid the supplies for the Polish army, or outright passed them to the Russians. Lubomirski, however, was a powerful magnate, and it took until late May for the king to officially relieve him of his command. Within about a month of the Russian invasion, the Poles have mostly retreated from Ukraine. On 7 July Kosciuszko's forces fought a delaying battle with the Russians at Volodymyr-Wilinskaya. Meanwhile, Poniatowski's army retreated to the Bug River, where Kosciuszko's units fought the Battle of Dubienka on 18 July to a draw. With about 5,300 troops, Kosciuszko defeated the attack of 25,000 Russians under General Mikhail Kharkovsky. Kosciuszko then had to retreat from Dubienka, as the Russians began flanking his positions crossing the nearby Austrian border. Although the Poles had to retreat from the Bug River line, they were not defeated so far, and of decisive battle or battles at more favorable locations closer to Warsaw were expected. Northern theater. In the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Russians crossed the Commonwealth border 4 days later than in the south, on the 22nd of May. Poland's ally, the Kingdom of Prussia, broke its alliance with Poland, and the Prussian commander of the Lithuanian army, Duke of Württemberg, betrayed the Polish-Lithuanian cause by refusing to fight the Russians. He never reached the front lines, feigned illness in Wolchin, and issued contradictory orders to his troops. Thus the army of Lithuania did little to oppose the advancing Russians, and kept withdrawing before their advance. Minsk was abandoned, after some skirmishes, on the 31st of May. Only after a change of commander on the 4th of June, did the army, now under General Joseph Judici, try to stand and fight the Russians. The Russians, however, defeated Judici at the Battle of Mir on the 11th of June and kept advancing through the Grand Duchy. The Commonwealth army retreated towards Grodno. On the 14th of June the Russians took Wilno, after only a small skirmish with local garrison. On the 19th of June, incompetently defended Nieswiez, and on the 20th of June, Kaunas, this time without any opposition. Judici, disgraced, was replaced by Michał Zabielo on the 23rd of June. Nonetheless, since Mir, no decisive engagements occurred in the northern theatre, as Polish army withdrew in relative order towards Warsaw, after minor defeat at Zelwa, eventually taking defensive positions along the Bug River near Brest. Russians took Grodno on the 5th of July and Białystok on the 17th of July. On the 23rd of July the Russians took Brest, defeating the local garrison. But on 24 they were defeated near Kremenviz. This last battle was the first significant Commonwealth victory on the northern front. War ends while Prince Poniatowski and Kosciuszko considered the outcome of the war still open, and were planning to use the combined Polish-Lithuanian forces to defeat the still separate Russian forces. King Poniatowski, with the consent of the guardians of the laws, decided to ask for a ceasefire. Tsarina Catherine demanded that the King Poniatowski joins the pro-Russian aristocratic faction, the Targowica Confederation, with his cabinet split. He gave in to her demand around 22–23 July, which effectively forced Prince Poniatowski to terminate military resistance. The last military confrontation of the war was fought on the 26th of July at Marcus Zoo in Lublin province, where an enemy attack was repelled by Polish cavalry led by Poniatowski. At the time King Poniatowski decided to sue for peace. The Polish army was still in good fighting condition, not suffering from any major defeat nor from lack of supplies. King Poniatowski thought that due to Russian numerical superiority defeat was nonetheless imminent, and more could be gained through negotiations with the Russians, with whom he hoped a new alliance could be formed. Although subsequent events would prove him wrong, the question of whether this could have been foreseen, and prevented through continued military resistance, has been subject to much debate among historians. The Polish military was widely dissatisfied with the ceasefire. Kosciuszko, Prince Poniatowski and many others would criticize the king's decision, and many, including Kosciuszko, would resign the commission in the coming weeks. Prince Poniatowski even considered rebelling against his uncle's orders, and even issued orders to bring the king to the army's camp by force if necessary, as was postulated by the more radical faction. Ultimately he decided not to continue fighting against his uncle's will, and the order was rescinded at the last moment before the departure of the group charged with capturing the king. Aftermath. Most Polish historians agree that the Polish capitulation was a mistake both from the military perspective and the political one. In the realm of military, the Poles had reasonable chances to defend the Vistula River line, and exhaust the Russian invading forces. From the political one, showing willingness to fight could have persuaded the partitioning powers that their plan was too costly. King Poniatowski's hopes that the capitulation will allow an acceptable diplomatic solution to be worked out were soon dashed. with new deputies bribed or intimidated by the Russian troops. A new session of parliament, known as the Grodno Sejm, took place in fall 1793. On the 23rd of November 1793, it concluded its deliberations under duress, annulling the constitution and acceding to the Second Partition. Russia took 250,000 square kilometers, while Prussia took 58,000 square kilometers of the Commonwealth's territory. This event reduced Poland's population to only one-third of what it was before the First Partition. The rump state was garrisoned by Russian troops and its independence was strongly curtailed. This outcome came also as a surprise to most of the Targowica Confederates, who had wished only to restore the status quo ante and had expected that the overthrow of the 3rd of May Constitution would achieve that end, and nothing more. The last bid to restore the reformed Commonwealth came with the Kosciuszko Uprising in 1794. The uprising failed and resulted in the Third Partition in 1795, in which the country lost all its remaining territories and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ceased to exist.